Hello everyone, I am Sebastian Daberdaku and I would like to welcome you to my presentation entitled Stress Detection from Wearable Sensor Data Using Deep Learning Methodologies. Before we start the presentation, I'd like to make two quick announcements. First of all, I would like to ask the participants at the end of the presentation to please fill in the survey. You can find the link to the survey at the top of the screen. And also, if at the end of the presentation any of you has any questions, we can meet up at the tables area. Again, you can find the link at the top of the screen and we can discuss them with you. So let's get started. So just a brief introduction about myself. I've been an expert data scientist at Sorin Tech since May 2020. And before that, I've worked as a postdoc researcher at the University of Padua, where I applied machine learning methods in bioinformatics and healthcare informatics domains, especially on problems like the protein interface prediction, antibody interface prediction, clinical data imputation, and disease prognosis prediction, especially ALS. But I'm also interested in, let's say, all real-world applications of machine learning, right? So why stress detection? Well, the quick answer is because the client wanted us to, right? But that's not the actual quick, a good enough reason. Well, because everybody experiences stress, right? And as many of you probably have already heard, chronic stress is deeply detrimental and bad for both the physiological and psychological well-being. And as you know, it can result in depression, sleeping disorders, but also in very serious diseases such as cardiovascular disease, diabetes, and even cancer, research has shown. And also another thing that makes you think about it is that according to the British Health and Safety Executive, stress accounts for 37% of all work-related ill health cases. So this should also concern not only workers, but also employers, right? And so developing robust methods for the rapid and accurate detection of human stress is, of course, very important. It's a very important task. And so we talk about a domain of computer science known as affective computing. So it's an emerging field, and it is inspired by the idea that we need to improve the human-computer interaction by building so-called empathic machines. What's an empathic machine? It's a machine that can detect the affective state of a human user and adapt its response, its behavior, according to the affective state or mental state of the user. From a healthcare point of view, stress is defined as a non-specific response of the body to any demand upon it, and is probably the most interesting of affective states, right? So we first need to understand stress a bit, right? Because the slide I showed you earlier talked about non-specific response of the body to any demand upon it. So if stress is really non-specific, unfortunately, this is bad news, right? Because we need something specific to be able to tell if someone is stressed or not, right? Actually, it is. I mean, there are some measurable physiological responses to stress that we can analyze and we can detect if a person is stressed or not. And what we need to understand is that stress is primarily a physiological response to a stimulus which is triggered by the sympathetic nervous system. What happens when we are stressed is that our body is releasing hormones like cortisol and adrenaline in our bloodstream. And these hormones lead to an increased breathing, heart rate, and muscle tensions. And these are physiological changes that prepare the organism for a physical reaction. If you've probably heard of the flight or fight mechanism in animals, right? So since we're all at some level, okay, very similar to other animals. We do have this kind of physical reactions. So the physiological response to a certain emotional stimuli are also to some extent specific. So not only so let's have a look at an example. We can see that the physiological response of let's say the heart rate here in this example, we can see that there's a very notable difference between a stressed the heart rate of a stressed person versus the heart rate of a normal person, right? By looking at it, we can tell that there is something that's different between the two, right? And the point here is that we need a way to measure and quantify this difference. And so here comes the question. So what kind of data should we use for stress prediction, right? Because what do we need to measure, all right? And there have been some experiments. And in some experiments, scientists train deep neural network models by using audio and video data that were captured captured on subjects being tested. What's the problem with audio and video data? It's that capturing video and audio data from subjects is extremely intrusive. All right, you have issues with privacy, and it's not easy. Then I mean, you find very few people who are willing to be filmed for a long period of time and then have their picture taken, their audio taken and used indefinitely in models from now on, right? So, but fortunately, on the other hand, we have wearable electronic devices at our disposal that are very minimal and only minimally intrusive, right? And we all have like smartphones in our pockets. Many of us have smartwatches that actually measure physiological activities. So to keep up with the current trend to quantify vital functions, a desirable next step is to infer affective states based on a multimodal wearable sensor data. Okay. And what kinds of data sets we used for this exercise, this study? Fortunately, there were some publicly available data sets, and there are several actually, but we selected 2 of them. And these data sets are, the first one is called WeSed, and it's a multimodal dataset. Multimodal meaning that the scientists who built the dataset measured many physiological signals. Okay, it's not one signal, but it's many signals on a dataset of 15 subjects during a laboratory study. And the second dataset here is referred upon as Fiznet. Actually, Fiznet is a wider range of datasets, but for simplicity and for time reasons, I'm going to just refer to it as Fiznet here. Which is a bit, again, multimodal, has many signals in it, but less signals, but more subjects. You see here we have 20 subjects. And how are these data sets built? Well, let's start with the WeSed dataset. This dataset features physiological and motion data recorded from a wrist and a chest-worn device. So we're talking about from somebody of the domain might recognize the machines that they use, the Empatica E4 and the Restiban. And actually, it's a sensor worn around the user's wrist, and the other one is worn around the chest. And what do these sensors measure? They measure 14 signals in total. The blood volume pulse, okay, which tells you what the heart rate of the person is, the electrocardiogram, which is the electrical activity of the heart, the electrodermal activity, both from wrist and chest. The electrodermal activity measures the sweating, all right, because it measures the changes in the electrical conductivity of the skin. And so if somebody is sweating, you can measure it with this kind of sensors. the electromyogram, which measures the electrical activity of the skeletal muscles, respiration, body temperature, measure both at the wrist and the chest, and the 3-axis acceleration, so accelerometers both at the wrist and the chest. Okay, and the data set is composed of 3 different affective states. So neutral, it features a neutral state for every subject. We have a neutral state, a state where the subject was for sure stressed, and finally amusement. And I'll try and explain what the protocol was about, how they built this data set. So all the 15 participants were subjected to the following protocol, which endured for around 2 hours. So it was composed of several activities, right, during which all these signals were measured. And there was let's say a baseline activity, a relaxation activity, where for 20 minutes the users were given like reading material or like lifestyle magazines, stuff like that. So nothing that would excite them or just simply to make them comfortable and before actually starting the experiment. The amusement consisted in watching a set of funny video clips, so people would be amused. And the stress condition. So this is interesting. The subjects were exposed to the well-studied TRARS social stress test, which consists of a public speaking and mental arithmetic task. So what this consists in is actually they were told in a very short amount of time that they had to memorize a kind of script or argument, and then they were about to make a public speaking exercise in front of a panel of experts, of supposed domain experts, which they really weren't domain experts, but they were simply posing as such. And this was thought to induce stress in the participants. And also arithmetic tasks like multiplications, summation, stuff like that, by trying to do them by heart, which would put the person under some kind of stress. And then there were also meditation segments where the amusement and stress conditions, which both aimed at exciting the subject, were followed by guided meditation. So to bring, let's say, the user down to the baseline condition. So to give an idea how these the previous steps I showed you were interleaved, they started with the baseline, then the stress, and then the amusement. And the transient here, the white blocks are, we can consider the white blocks in between the baseline stress and stress amusement, we can consider them as meditation. Okay? So point is, we know for sure that after this experiment, we know for sure which part of the signal belongs to the baseline, which part of the signal belongs to the stressed portion, and which part of the signal belongs to the amusement portion of the experiment. Okay. And what about Fiznet? Well, Fiznet is a similarly built dataset. It contains the physiological data of 20 subjects, which were collected using 2 non-invasive sensors. Again, one wrist-worn, a different kind of sensor, but again worn on the wrist. This one acquired 3-axis acceleration, so it had an accelerometer sensor in it, temperature, and again electrodermic activity, which measures the skin sweating. And the second one is the Nonin 3150 that acquires the heart rate and the pulse oximetry, the arterial blood oxygenation. This is a method for measuring the oxygenation of arterial blood. So here we actually have 4 affective states. We had 3 in the previous dataset. We have physical stress, cognitive stress, emotional stress, and then at the end relaxation. And in our work, we analyzed 2 different classification problems using these 4 states. One binary classification problem, where we try to classify relaxation against the other 3 types of stress. Okay, so all the three different stress labels were put together in only one label, classified generally speaking as simply stress against relaxation, and a multi-label classification where we had relaxation against physical stress, against cognitive and emotional stress. This because it was suggested by the developers of the Dataset and by other similar state-of-the-art research, because they'd seen that when they were administering the cognitive or emotional stress, the one was causing the other, or it was the other way around. So actually, they did it. They designed the experiment in one way, but then in the end, they realized that there was actually no real difference between cognitive stress and emotional stress. Because if I remember correctly, when the subjects were being explained what the experiment was, in the cognitive stress, they were suffering from emotional stress by having somebody explain them what it was going to happen to them. So what were the tasks? So the first task was relaxation. The second one was physical stress, so running on a treadmill. Okay, so real physical stress. Then again, followed by relaxation. Then they had cognitive stress, which means counting backwards from a large number by subtracting 7, plus the Stroop test. And while they were subtracting 7, if they made a mistake, they had to start over again. And so it can be stressful, right? And the Stroop test is actually, I don't know if many of you know it, but you've probably seen pictures on social media where you have words describing colors. Like you have written blue, yellow, green, and actually the word blue is actually colored blue, and then the word green is actually colored green, and so on. And then at some point they switch the colors so that the color does not actually match the word. So you have like green, but it's actually red, right? So it's written green, the word reads green, but the color of the font is red. And so when you try to read it, at some point you start making mistakes because you have two stimuli, two different stimuli that are not that are discordant. Okay, and this is another kind of test. Probably seen it. Followed by relaxation, and again the emotional stress horror movie scene. I don't know which movie was it though. Probably read it, but I can't really remember. And at the end, ended with another relaxation session. And so this is what the signals that were required look like, right? And for each, you see at the bottom here, we have the segments. So we know for sure which segment corresponded to which emotional or affective state, right? So we know that the first part is the relaxation, followed by physical stress, followed by relaxation, followed by cognitive stress, and so on, okay? And also another thing, and this is true also for WeSed and Fiznet, the signals were given to us already synchronized. Okay, so even if they were coming from different sensors, who developed these data sets, they already synchronized them for us. Okay, so we didn't have the synchronization problem to know for sure where how to align them with one another. Okay, they were already aligned for us. Okay, so here comes the question: why to use deep learning, right? Because as I explained, as I showed just you, we have very few subjects, right? 15 subjects for one data set, 20 subjects for the other. When we talked about deep learning or neural networks in general, we know that what is to be expected is a very large number of inputs, right, of samples. And so in general, when the data sets are not very big, what you do is you try and go about using classical machine learning methods, not deep learning, right? But where lies the problem with classical machine learning methods? The problem relies in the fact that for these methods to be effective, you often need a lot of domain knowledge, and you often need to handcraft features. And domain knowledge was a problem for us because none of us had deep enough understanding of these physiological signals, probably we would have needed some physician or some medical doctor or somebody with a deep understanding of these kind of signals to be able to say, okay, this is an important feature, this is not an important feature, right? For instance, I don't know if you see the electrocardiogram signal. Maybe, I don't know, I'm saying something that might not be true, but like somebody would tell you, yeah, the interesting thing to look for is the distance between peaks in the signal. So we would know that, measure the peaks and see if that changes in time, stuff like that. Problem is we didn't have this kind of expertise, okay? And so what you do when you don't have this kind of expertise, you try to use methods that don't have this kind of process, don't have this need. And fortunately, deep learning were shown to be effective in stress detection in, let's say, and allow users to treat the problem as much as it could be interpreted as black box as possible, right? Without having too much domain knowledge on the subject. Let's have a look at the study design, how we designed the study. So the objective was to investigate the effective state classification capabilities of neural networks on the Fiznet and Fiznet datasets. Now, we worked on a total of 5. We were in 5 people who worked on this project. But since we had like different backgrounds and different knowledge of frameworks, one team, which included me, worked on the Fiznet dataset using the Keras TensorFlow framework, while the other team, which worked on the Fiznet dataset, used PyTorch Lightning framework. Okay, so this was more of a practical issue, right? Because I already knew somewhat knew Keras TensorFlow. The other guys knew more PyTorch Lightning, and so this is the reason why we split the work like this. And we did some pre-processing on the signals before trying to perform classification, and before training any models on them. For one thing, not all the sensors produce signals at the same frequency, so at the same rate. So we had to resample, and on Fiznet we tried 2 sample rates, one at 35 hertz and one at 700 hertz. So in one, we simply brought down most of the signals, because I believe the chest-worn sensor was producing signals at very high frequency at 700 hertz, while the wrist-worn one was producing lower frequency signals, and we had to normalize the sample rate. Okay. And the same thing was done for Fiznet, which was brought to 8 hertz. We performed outlier removal, and this was done with a Hampel filter only for Fiznet. So a Hampel filter is a sliding window filter, and what you do is you run a sliding window of a certain width on the signal, and you replace the value at the middle of the window with the median of the values. And this is actually a low-pass filter. So if you have an outlier, some spike, very abrupt spike, you remove them. Okay. And then we normalize the data in the -1, 1 interval. Okay, data normalization is an important step for numerical accuracy. Let's have a look at the classification method. So what we did, we extracted, so we had to build the samples, right? Because we have like these very long, like 2-hour-long signals, but we have to define a classification problem in terms of samples and assign a label to each sample, right? So what we did was this: we extracted overlapping time windows from the input time series. We converted these overlapping windows to multi-channel image representations. So we had for each signal 14 we said and 7 in Fiznet. We converted each. Okay, so we have the sliding window. The sliding window has 14 signals in each of its instances, and this is converted to a multi-channel. If it were a color picture, it would have 3 channels, right? Red, green, blue. Here it has 14 because we have 14 signals for WeSat and 7 for Fiznet. This is the idea behind this. And then we classified these images using a convolutional neural network. So this is the main idea behind the classification task. What kind of picture representations we use to transform these signals to? So we used Gramian angular fields, and there are actually two kinds of these representations. What a Gramian angular field is an image which is obtained from a time series, and it represents some temporal correlation between each time point. Okay, and you can actually compute two different kinds of Gramian angular fields: the Gramian angular summation field and the Gramian angular difference field. And there are software packages that allow you to do it. So you simply put in a time series, and it will produce an image for you. Okay. And another representation type is the Markov transition field. A Markov transition field is an image which is obtained from a time series and represents a field of transition probabilities for a discretized time series. So again, transforms a time series for us into a picture. Okay. And before earlier, like 2 slides earlier, I said that we use multi-channel pictures only for Fiznet. We also tried another approach. Instead of building one, let's say, square picture with 7 channels, we built one rectangular picture with 1 channel by concatenating the 7 Gramian angular fields obtained for the 7 channels of the time window. So this is something that we tried, and then this was used as a sample for the input CNN. Okay, so the infrastructure, we employed Amazon Stagemaker. It is a cloud machine learning platform, and it allows developers to create, train, and deploy machine learning models in the cloud. And it's a very handy tool, because you don't have to have much computing power at disposal. You can instantiate very powerful machines to perform your machine learning tasks, and you pay only for the time you're using them, right? So instead of having very costly servers and with a lot of GPUs and a lot of memory, inside you can just rent out these cloud machines. And they also provide a managed Jupyter Notebook instance for interactively programming Stagemaker. We used it, but up to now, our experience is that the the managed Jupyter Notebook service is not working very well. It has a few bugs, but the idea of Amazon Stagemaker is a pretty cool idea, because it's a very interesting tool, and allows you to also deploy. The interesting thing is you can also deploy these models on the cloud, and then it gives you endpoints where you can call these models and make predictions. Then it's it's a very powerful tool. So let's get to our convolutional neural network architecture. So for WeSat, what we used, we implemented it with TensorFlow, as I said earlier. So it had two-dimensional convolutional layers with 32 filters, each one followed by a max pooling filter. Then it was followed by 2 fully connected layers with a dropout layer between them. And we used the rectified linear unit activation function for all layers, with the exception of the last one, which used softmax activation. And what optimization algorithm we used? We tried we tried several of them, and we tried Adam, AMS-GRAD, and SGD. And the learning algorithm itself was used as a hyperparameter in our setup. And as a loss function, we use the sparse categorical cross entropy, because it's not a binary classification problem. It was a ternary classification problem, because we had 3 output classes. And about Fiznet, it was somewhat similar. It had 4 convolutional 2-dimensional layers with increasing filters, as you can see, 32, 64, 128, and 255 filters. Each layer followed with a max pool layer and a dropout layer. And finally, there were 4 fully connected dropout layers. The activation function was a parametric rectified linear unit. And as optimization algorithm, we used Adam W with learning rate set as hyperparameter. And loss function, as you can see here, BCA with the logit loss for binary classification and cross entropy loss for multi-class classification. This was defined using PyTorch Lightning framework. Okay, the I forgot to write it in the presentation, but the other one, the one for we said we used TensorFlow Keras sequential model sequential. Okay, a different framework. The hyperparameters. Well, some of them are classical, right? Like the best size. All neural networks have a best size hyperparameter usually, but here we had also the Gramian angular field calculation method, summation or difference. And for we said we stuck to just the Gramian angular fields and not the Markov transition fields because we had some issues with the high frequency samples. When we used time windows with the 700 hertz sample rate, the signal was too large, and we had some numerical. I mean, the software library that we use to compute these images had some issues in rendering them. So we simply decided to drop and stick to the Gramian angular field method. And the image size was also used as a hyperparameter. Then we had, as I said earlier, the learning rate, the optimizer algorithm, the time step, which means when I have the sliding window, how many samples am I going to move the sliding window from one sample to the other, right? Because, and as I said earlier, we used overlapping sampling windows. And then the window size, which tells you the sliding window size. And I believe we had good results with, the idea was that the best results were obtained with a small timestamp, so with a lot of overlapping, so where the windows had a lot of overlap, and the window size as big as possible. We tried, I think, up to 5 minutes. And I think that then the limit of the 5-minute limit was we were forced to use it because if we went any larger, then we wouldn't fit in the segments that I showed you earlier in the experiment. We had 2-hour experiment with different interleaving states. Obviously, if you make a window too large, then you don't have enough samples in the window. And for Fiznet, they are similar, like the image size, either Gramian angular field on Markov transition field image size, the window size, the step size, which means, again, how much we move the sliding window forward. A transformation method. Here we had 2 before, we have 3. The input shape, which means either use 7 channels as so square image with 7 channels, or one rectangular image where we concatenate all the 7 channels in one direction. And again, the batch size and the learning rate. And let's have a look at the results. So we had to first of all to determine the hyperparameters to use, right? And an issue, what one would do is would have like very big and very well-defined training, validation, and test sets, right? This is the way you do things when you have a lot of subjects. Unfortunately, we had just 15 subjects in one data set, and we had 20 subjects in the other data set. And what we did is that we split the data set into 2 disjoint sets, one used for training made of 12 subjects, and one for test made of 3 subjects. Now, what is of paramount importance in these scenarios is that you must never, ever mix up samples of the same subject in the training and validation sets. And this is unfortunately something that happens very often. You see studies reporting 99% accuracy, and then you find out that they have only one subject maybe in the data set, or a few subjects in the data set. They got samples of overlapping time windows, right? So we have one window, then another one, and they're overlapping a lot between one another, right? And so what happens if one of these two overlapping windows goes in the training and the other goes in the validation or in the test? Well, if I've seen a sample in the training and then I see another one which overlaps 90% with it in the test, I'm obviously going to be able to classify it, right? But actually, I'm just kidding myself in this situation, right? Because as soon as I have a new subject I've never seen before, I won't be able to predict anything. So the way to go here is to split the subjects to do splits at the subject level, and only then use to perform training and validation, testing, and whatnot, and report the results. And what we did is we performed a Bayesian hyperparameter search with 100 iterations, which means we had a grid of values, but we didn't explore all of them. And Stagemaker allows you to perform a Bayesian hyperparameter search. So you give it a budget of 100 iterations, and it will repeat the test for you 100 times, and then give you the best the model with the best results at the end. At each iteration, the convolutional neural network was trained for a maximum of 50 epochs, okay? And we used early stopping if the loss of the validation did not improve for 5 consecutive epochs. And this is something pretty common, right? You usually do this, so you don't to prevent overtraining, because neural networks usually tend to overtrain, and early stopping is a good way of preventing that. And we got on these 3 subjects, these values, the best values were 97.96% accuracy on the 700 Hertz dataset, and 98.79% accuracy for the 35 Hertz dataset. So it seems like the very high sampling rate here didn't help much, but probably this difference is not statistically significant because we are talking about only 3 subjects, right? So what we did next, we then performed the 5-fold cross-validation, where we split the subjects into 5 disjoint groups of 3 subjects each. Again, we performed Bayesian search, and we got the following average accuracy, and it was 92.58% for the 35 Hertz dataset. And for each of the 5 folds, we got these accuracies. You can see they vary sensibly, because you go from 97% down to 87, again 87, then 92, then 96. So what does this mean? You have a lot of high variability, and this is due to the low subject number. The bottom line is this: if we had more subjects, we would have probably gotten much better results and much more stable results. And this variability is most likely due to the fact that these 3 subjects, every 3 subject split that we were able to get was very different from the others, unfortunately. And so to minimize this variability of the trained test weights, we performed a leave one subject out cross-validation experiment. So what this means is that of the 15 subjects, I take one subject in turn as test set, and then use the 14 remaining ones as a training set, okay, to train the convolutional neural network. And in this context, we did not use the validation set because we had very few subjects, but we stopped the training after 10 epochs because we had seen that there were enough. 10 epochs were enough in our previous experiment. And with early stopping as soon as the local minimum on the training loss was encountered. And we used the best hyperparameters identified in the previous step. Now, ideally, again, using hyperparameters determined on the previous step wouldn't be the best approach here. But again, we didn't have enough subjects. In an ideal world, you would perform hyperparameter search on one dataset, train on another dataset, and then show the results on a test set that you look at only at the end of the experiment, right? And here we can see what we got. This is a confusion matrix for the classification of the WeSet subjects. And you can see on the left, we have true labels here. And these are the predicted labels. And you can see, for instance, the baseline, we got an accuracy of over 95% accuracy in classifying the baseline, and also over 95% accuracy in classifying the stress. What's interesting to see is that we aren't that good at classifying the amusement, right? And as you can see, most of the amusement is mislabeled as baseline. A few samples of amusement are classified as stress, and then a little bit more than half of them are actually correctly classified as amusement, right? So, but what's the bottom line here? Still, even if it's not that a great result, actually we're never really interested in amusement, right? We wanted to classify stress. And if we can have a look at this. If we remove this label from if we just considered amusement to be equal to baseline or simply not stressed, to have, so to speak, a binary classification problem, there would be no issues at all, right? This would be a very good classification model. And here we have the classification results for all the subjects in the leave one out. In the leave one subject out cross-validation setup. You can see we also have some subjects for which we achieve 100% accuracy. 1, 2, 3, 4 subjects, we get 100% accuracy in classification, right? It's very, very encouraging result. And here, what's interesting here, we have the average of all these measures. And what's interesting is that we also compared our result with other state-of-the-art methods. And what comes here, what pops here is that our method beat all these other state-of-the-art classification method based on classical classical machine learning methods. These are all classical machine learning methods. This is based on deep learning, and our deep learning method got the best of all of them. What about Fiznet? Well, I'll try to be quick here. Again, we performed the Bayesian hyperparameter search for both the binary and multi-class classification. If you remember, here we had 2 different classification tasks. We used a fixed test set of 3 subjects, and for the training step, 2 subjects were selected randomly as validation, and the remaining 15 were used for training. So 3 for test, 15 for training, 2 for validation, but inside of the training and validation, they were switched randomly from one iteration to the other. And again, after performing the hyperparameter search, we performed leave one subject out cross-validation. And so in turn, 1 subject was used for as a test set. The remaining 17 were used for training, and 2 were used for validation, with the hyperparameters that were discovered in the previous step. And here are some of the results. And I can see you the mean accuracy achieved in the binary classification was 77.78%. And in the 3-class classification, we performed a little worse with 72.93%. So the results here were, let's say, comparable with other state-of-the-art methods. Not the best. We didn't break the record here, but still we didn't. I mean, it's a pretty good result compared to the others. And these are other measures. We have accuracy, F1 score, precision recall, and specificity. And they are divided by subjects. So as you can see, there are some subjects here that we aren't able to predict very well. And this is another indicator that, unfortunately, the subjects vary a lot between one another, and that we have small data sets, unfortunately. And this is the leave one. Okay, same as before, but for the 3-class classification problem. And we can see that, again, if we put together the stress, we get not bad results, right? So the problem here is that it's not very easy to classify between different levels of stress. That's the bottom line here. And this is the precision for class. This was an F1 score for each class, the precision for each class. And again, it seems that the most difficult class to predict is the cognitive emotional stress. In conclusion, we also tried end-to-end approaches without let's say, feature engineering, such as the image conversions that we used. We tried ResNet, encoder, and multiple instance learning recurrent neural networks, and all of them unfortunately resulted in worse performance. So here I showed you the best performing methods that we got. And as I said earlier, unfortunately, the datasets are limited, both in the number of subjects and duration. As I said earlier, we only have like 2 hours recording for each subject, so it's not a very long duration for each subject. Okay, so how do these datasets generalize? This question, I think, remains. I don't have an answer for this question, unfortunately. And who knows? Hopefully they generalize well, but we will not know for sure until we try with new subjects, right? And so the bottom line here is that to bring stress detection to the next level, we need larger and richer data sets in order to fully exploit the potential of deep learning methods. And finally, as I mentioned earlier, to exploit the full potential of neural networks, you need a lot of samples, but really, really a lot of samples. And this was not our case, unfortunately. But yeah, that's it. So to conclude, I would like to thank the team who worked from Soaring Tech, who worked with me on this project. And first of all, Gianluca Gerard, our CTO at Soaring Tech, and then other colleagues, data scientist colleagues, as Alessandro Blanda, Antonino Cappuccio, Luca Bellanova, and Simone Cardis. And I would like all of you who followed my presentation, I would like to thank you all. And again, please remember to fill in the survey at the end of the presentation. And now I will be joining the tables room where you will be able to ask questions. Thanks again for watching.